that have been submitted by people on the websites and students here at UW, and or created by other various nefarious people. And our format here is one is going to randomly choose one? Randomly choose one. And then I will assign it to one of our guests. And we'll go from there. James, what do you do? Okay. And then, we going to score them? Should we score them, or should we just let them off?
Yes, point system.
All right, we'll do applause. No, take too long.
Okay. Pick the category.
Oh, I can let him pick a category?
Yeah.
All right.
You can pick the category.
All right. I'll go with my co-host here, Brian. Choose a category.
How about game design for 500? Is that a hard one?
Oh, good question for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we wrote this one for you. Why do you think Facebook exploded so much while Twitter and MySpace really haven't? Well, let's put some context around that. Like, Twitter's huge, right? So I think what we're talking about is Twitter gaming. There was this MySpace gaming and Facebook gaming.
So there's not a lot that you could do with gaming in Twitter compared to Facebook, for sure. So kind of the question is, why did Facebook become such a dominant force in games over MySpace? And I guess that has to do a lot with the growth of Facebook. I know that management at Facebook made it a top priority to make gaming happen. They kind of had that foresight to see that Facebook was going to be a very broad platform for people to do stuff on the internet, and they kind of early on built in their system to be friendly to games, I guess. I have to give a pretty general answer like that.
I think, just adding to that, I think the interesting on Twitter, which hasn't, I have seen some game designs done on Twitter more recently, but also is really becoming an interesting narrative format, like both obviously personal narratives, but and reporting narratives. I mean, it's like the place to go for any news nowadays. But also things like the Mad Men experience on Twitter, where people get taken over the characters and are twitting as those characters in a kind of continuous flow. So there's some interesting stuff to go there.
Do you want us to jump in with any additional stuff?
Only if it's good and funny.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about that, well, thank you. So there are apparently people rebooting Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip on Twitter, and talk about like a niche thing. It's like you're doing a new show that lasted less than a season. They got canceled 4 years ago, and yet people are doing this on Twitter to do new content. There has to be money in there somewhere.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of games on Twitter, at Wizards we had a small amount of success using Twitter as a way to communicate things, but it was like, what happens is, on this particular day, you play Magic, and then you have your Twitter account on this thing, and all of a sudden crazy things can happen. It'll be like, you're playing, and it's just like, the world blew up, all the creatures are dead, sorry. And like, that can just happen. So like, that was something that we used to Twitter to layer on top of something in the real world, but Twitter in 140 characters, it's really hard to like put mechanics. So
I take that as a challenge, sir.
All right.
I would love to see what you
We're
make.
look forward to the results of that. All right, let's go down. Nick, why don't you pick a category?
Who would win for 100?
Oh, good.
All right, it's an easy one. Gandalf versus Lord Voldemort.
Gandalf versus Voldemort.
Yeah.
This
He
is
who
easy.
must not be named.
I did a lot of research on Lord of the Rings for Lord of the Rings Online, so I can tell you that Gandalf has no actual powers. He exists entirely on hype. Gandalf is all about image management. He's fantastic at that, but when it comes down to pointing a wand at killing someone, Lord Voldemort, round one, not close.
We agree with that one? Yeah.
Okay, so yes,
No, he tricked the Balrog.
Balrogs are also weak. That's the only thing I think anyone that fell down. First of all, Balrog fell down a pit. He had wings. How did he fall down a pit? Terrible Balrog.
All right. Chris, pick a category.
Let's go game design.
Just any of your choice.
Okay.
What should we think about, all right, this will be interesting from your perspective. What should we think about when designing ARGs? Alternate reality game.
What do I think about?
What should we think about when designing them?
Gosh, if I was designing one, I would try to take the player, viewer, to somewhere they've never been before. Because, gosh, we've been to a lot of places, and that would be my challenge to myself. So I don't know how this game really works.
You make stuff up as you go along, just
Yeah.
like your real life.
Oh, that would be kind of it. I mean, I didn't even know what that meant until you told me. So clearly,
Yeah, I'm only one of your better friends. Why should you know what I've done? That's okay. I know your game.
True.
That's
That
okay.
is true. Maybe you can answer the question. Can I? Is that like phone a friend? Can I?
Yeah.
Can I do that?
Sure. Well, I'll go for you first, and then I'll jump in at the end.
I think I lose.
Jeff, we'll kick it to you.
Well, I was curious about that last answer. I mean, when you say taking somebody someplace they've never been in an ARG, do you mean like inside of the mind of a Mexican maid, or do you mean like into a strip club? Like into a physical place or into a character's place?
You know.
Either one of those sounds really good.
There's a Governator joke in there somewhere.
Maybe somehow.
Oh, too soon? Too soon? Sorry.
It wasn't too soon before it happened.
How many people here have seen the online video of Jesse Shell when games invade real life? Anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Write it down and go Google it. When games invade real life. It's something that everybody interested in game design should go view, and it discusses the future of what we can do to have games sort of constantly watching us and measuring us, and what would happen if we were always thinking about our score in everything we do.
Gamification is the buzzword of the year.
So to
Which I did not use in my talk.
in terms of what
Somehow.
Somehow I did.
But you get a some sort of prize or award for using that word. That's how they get everyone to use it.
Oh, I thought I got an achievement for not using it.
Oh,
It's like the Upstrom.
I don't have that.
Yeah.
To answer the question more specifically, for I guess a couple of high points in when I think about alternate reality games or transmedia experiences. First is what's the route in for the audience, right? We want to have an entry point, or we would call it the rabbit hole, to that magical world that you want your audience to go to, and try to keep that as organic to their experience as possible. You want to make sure that you're defining the line between a hoax and an alternate, and an immersive experience very carefully, and that you're not trying to perpetrate a hoax. That you're making sure that there is an acknowledged suspension of disbelief as they go into this experience with you. And then be careful in terms of how you're designing the hurdles, the challenges you want them to overcome, that they're really organic to the subject matter, to the story, that they feel natural to the story, as opposed to just BS that you're throwing in front of them to prevent them getting to the content they want to get to. They want to feel that the puzzle is as much part of the story as the story itself, as opposed to just things blocking you from the story.
That's a good answer.
All right.
I'm going to go off the board and take divisors of 2.
I think that means narrative right here. What protagonist do you wish you could be? That you can say in public.
God, I have a good joke. Who's the guy who has to spend all the money? Brewster?
Bruce's
That
million.
guy,
That's
yeah,
the
that
guy. That guy.
Yeah.
All right.
What's the rest of that? I don't know that story.
Explain the movie.
I didn't see the movie. I know of the movie.
So you want to be a protagonist that you can make up because you've only heard the concept without being locked
all
into
I
his
know is
actual plot line.
that he's forced to spend like millions and millions of dollars, or else he doesn't get something even better. I would love to do
You'd love that.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. I would invest it in the game industry. Probably the best way to lose it.
All right, Jeff, pick a category.
I will stay with narrative for 500.
500.
Lord of the Rings, why all the hype?
Magnificent world build, came out during a time when being long-haired was awesome.
Anybody want to jump on that
And
one?
pipeweed.
And pipeweed.
Pipeweed. Brilliant descriptions of surveyed land.
That's
That's always a crowd pleaser.
I think that has basically, well, the extensive world that you can get tons of detail into, like that's great for somebody in like hour 100 of being interested in the license, but I think what's going on there is the same thing that went on with Star Wars. It was one of the first times that someone took the sort of Joseph Campbell hero story, just like every story ever is like this, and we got rid of all the spaceships and instead we had like a bunch of magic and wizards and swords and elves and stuff. And it's just like, when you find the right window dressing for a particular person and you give them the archetypical story, it's going to work for them. It's just in who we are, and I think that's...
I'll tell you why Lord of the Rings worked. Lord of the Rings worked because world building matters. Lord of the Rings worked because Tolkien was obsessive compulsive about world building. There are very few worlds in any sort of narrative that truly feel like they're not actually just a movie set. The feeling that you're going for is that you are in a world where you have to believe that the characters, if they turned left instead of right, there would be something there. Tolkien was a linguist. He invented languages, kind of dumb languages, but languages. When I was researching for Lotro's crafting system, I needed to ask our Tolkien experts about the mineralogy of an imaginary world so I could figure out which minerals were mined and which veins of minerals would have which gems in them. Like, the world was deep, and that captured the imagination of a generation. Also, it had very short heroes. Which I guess is good if you're short and you want people to identify.
Give me that buzzer.
I also think that like Smaug was the first big dragon. Like before that, you look at old like medieval paintings and stuff, and the dragons are like the size of alligators. And
Right.
St. George with the spear, you're like, yeah, you're killing a little Komodo dragon or something like that. Smaug was a badass, and I think it's the first time.
Well, in Western, not in Asian. The dragons.
Yeah, okay.
Dragons always had stature.
Yeah, to the Western audience.
All right, why don't you pick a category?
Me?
No, Brian.
Industry has not been tapped. Yeah, I'm an explorer.
All right. Actually, we should do this one all the way across the board. How'd you get the start in the field?
Well, my answer is I went to business school and found myself missing a whole bunch of material because I was thinking about magic cards instead of paying attention to class. And ended up in marketing research at Wizards of the Coast. And that was a wonderful place to start because I got to see so many consumers come in and watch them behind the one-way glass and interact with them and see the frustration that they had in trying to figure out these rules, and gave me a good understanding of their emotional needs that they're looking for in games and their really, really bad reading comprehension skills. And eventually, I got to know the people in the R&D department and just started submitting game ideas. And I think that a lot of game designers' stories are, I just started designing games. And you would not believe how many people I've interviewed, like phone screening for game design jobs, who sound brilliant and look good on paper, and then I ask them, what games have you designed? And they say, oh, I think I would be good at it. And you've never done it. Like, not even on your own, not even for fun. No, you gotta just design games. It doesn't matter if they go anywhere or do anything. So,
Nick?
I got my start because I wrote a humor and editorial column for a website while I was a project manager at a bank. I was involved in Y2K testing, and I had a lot of spare time because I figured it would all just work out fine. And it did, so we're good. And I actually hosted hosted a player gathering, first in Minneapolis and then in Boston, because everyone else involved in the website was terrified of public speaking. as should be amazingly obvious to everyone in the room, I am not afraid of making a fool of myself in front of a room full of people. So got to know a lot of the Asheron's Call team, and was brought over as a junior producer, worked on the live team, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Tom?
So for me, I spent 4 years of college and 4 years of high school traveling around Ohio and then the United States and then the world playing Magic. And I realized at some point I was going to have to figure out how to make this make money. And luckily they pay people to make that game, which is kind of neat. And I'm one of them now. I managed to convince them that I should be one of those people by, like Brian said, there was a weird way of playing Magic that I kind of latched onto and built myself up as the expert on that with a website and some columns on websites and stuff. And when I pitched myself to Wizards, I said, I am the guy for this, and you should respect me for that. And somehow they said that they would agree with me on that, and now I work here, and now I look a lot more official, but I still feel like I'm on some kind of crazy faking it thing. It's just like, the way to get in is like, make stuff and show it to people. And like, sometimes people will play it and be like, okay, that's cool, and then you'll eventually get to the point where people play it, and then they start being really happy while they play it. And that's when you start going to companies and you're like, I make people happy, look. And then they give you money to make stuff for them. So, yeah.
James?
He was bitten by a radioactive spider.
Yes.
That's his origin story.
And it gave me spider senses, even though spiders don't have spider senses. These guys stole my answer because I also started with Wizards of the Coast. Back when Magic was not even released yet, I knew the people who worked there, and one of the first things I did for them was to compile a real digest, not just everything, but about 10% of MTGL. It was on a thing called the Internet. After that, I did a few game pitches for them and started my own business when I realized they had way more pitches than they were ever going to catch. And so, once again, through knowing people and doing side work for Wizards.
I think I told a little bit of my story already. I basically programmed my computer night and day since I was 14. When I was 21, I found a little tiny ad in the Vancouver Sun that they were looking for assembly language programmers. And I thought, oh, something I can do. And when they went into the job interview, they were like, and how's your C? And C is the programming language. And I totally lied and said, oh yeah, not a problem. Luckily, they never asked me one question on C.
Oh yeah, C, D, all of it.
I would have pushed my luck, but I had a stack of assembly printouts because I always like to print out everything that I did and just kind of look at it. This pile of stuff is so complicated. Nobody understood what any of it meant. And they hired me on that. And then what I did was I went and I had a friend. I didn't even go to a bookstore. I had a friend that had a book on C. So when I took the book, got the book from him, and I was starting in a week on Monday, and I read the book cover to cover. When I started on Monday, I was ready to go, and the rest is history.
Yep.
I can probably nail all of my success down to coming from a small town in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. I had very few neighbors, which meant that I had a lot of time because I was also an only kid, so I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of writing because we couldn't afford a whole lot, so I wrote a lot of my own stories. I played a lot of video games when I could afford them. I read a lot of comics, watched a lot of TV, did a lot of movies. It was basically a starving media geek, even back then. But I noticed, because I was a kid of the 80s, that the storyline in the G.I. Joe TV show was different than the storyline in the G.I. Joe comic book. But the TV show, for some reason, went on into this movie, and something was made a connection here. And I was smart enough back then to be like, this probably has something to do with money. But I was really interested in storytelling in a kind of a corporate, but like a world build side, right? And so I went on to do a proper English major and promptly started hating pompous literary dorks. And so spent a lot of time during my undergrad degree, instead of studying literature, learning how to build stuff on the net. Because that's the other thing about coming from the middle of nowhere, Ohio, is that one way I wanted a literary magazine, but to do something that wasn't very literary, looking back, but we had no program for it at my school, so I built it myself. I wanted to learn how to program, so I learned how to do HyperCard, back then, to do storytelling myself. Do short film production, so I did that myself. And so I learned how, not just what made something work in a medium, but how to make that medium enough to get to that point, fake it till you make it, right? So that I learned how this basic system worked. And then when this Henry Jenkins guy at MIT started talking about transmedia storytelling in 2005, I emailed him. I was like, this is exactly what I've been thinking about for the last 20 years. Oh my God, you rule. And much to my astonishment, he wrote me back. And so we started this conversation, and so then on a whim, I went up to go listen to the come to our graduate program talk, even though there was no way I was getting an MIT. We come on, it's MIT, right? And the next thing I knew, I was at MIT. And so I was there for 5 years, first as a grad student working with Henry, and then I helped them boot up this video game lab at MIT and worked with a bunch of the guys in the video game industry. And the next thing I knew, a couple guys from Microsoft were there at one of the conferences that we threw, and they said, "You're Jeff Long, aren't you?" And I was like, "Who's asking?" And it turns out that these guys have read my master's thesis on transmedia storytelling. They're like, "You should come talk to us." And so I was doing some consulting with them, and the next thing I knew, they offered me a job, and my wife and I were moving from Boston to Seattle. And the last 13, 14 months has been probably the most educational thing I've ever done, even beyond MIT, beyond everything else, learning how the industry works and doesn't. So,
Especially this afternoon.
especially this afternoon, absolutely. Pinnacle.
Wanda, you step forward, answer yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually started out, for all you writers in here and stuff, I'm a lit major. I started out working at Seattle Times. And I worked there for 5 years, started a publication for high school students. And was out of the blue recruited, I guess, because I was a woman and I, was considered sort of the mother hen sort of thing, to work at Sierra Online on one of their online on the Imagination Network. And I wrote content. I was a content manager. And then I was promoted then I was a producer. And kind of the rest is history. Wound up at Wizards of the Coast, and they said, well, we've got this stuff, we'd like to do more things online. Do you want to do that kind of thing? And so all of a sudden I was running their online, and then they were bought by Hasbro, and then all of a sudden I was running everything for Hasbro. And it was just kind of wacky, and here I am, Wanted to be a sort of a journalist and a book publisher, and here I am now. And now I'm teaching. I mean, go figure. So that's my wacky background.
My version is shorter on the educational side. I had started playing role-playing games, which were kind of the Dungeons & Dragons experience for me was quite revolutionary because I was a severe dyslexic and couldn't read all the way up through high school. And encountering an activity that was all about imagination and social play, to me was quite empowering. And so it actually drove me to learn to read. And because everybody's talking about Tolkien and all these orcs, and I don't know any of this crap, right? So I had to, basically Tolkien taught me to read really slowly. So that experience was very powerful for me, and just kind of became an obsession of gaming. And so by the time I dropped out of my second freshman year of college, I didn't really have anything to do but gaming. So, took $300 and started a game company, and that was the beginning. All right, Tom, give us a category.
No one's touched games. Let's do that. Near the bottom, sure.
Near the bottom.
Yeah, the bottom, great.
All right,
Oh.
what should we think about when world building?
Think about when world building. I think the biggest question you need to ask when you're building a world for your game is how you expect the players to interact with it and how you'll need to use it in the future. The two games that I would compare in terms of their world building are Magic's world building is very different. Well, for Magic, we come out with a set, and then a year later we come out with a new set, and we've gone to a different place. So what the world building needs we have are kind of shallow. It's not, we want it to feel like it's a world that's new and it's a place you can imagine. But we also don't need to know where the trade routes go or what the seasons are in detail or whatever, because what you really want out of that is some cards that you can play with and beat up your friends with. As an alternative, you have a license like Legend of the Five Rings, which is also a card game, but they don't hop from world to world every year. They stay in the same place. So they have the same groups of people around all the time. And what you end up with is this incredibly detailed world because they need to know enough about it to stay there forever. So for example, there's a book they just came out with where it's like, there's a page dedicated to what kind of chopsticks each clan uses. And you're like, why does this matter? Why is this here? Why did someone think about that? And it's because it matters when you stay there for 15 years. Because people want to know more and more, and you have to keep building that fractal complexity for them.
Hey, just jumping on, I think it comes down to what some of the speakers talked about earlier today. It is the difference between linear and interactive media, right? When you're writing a novel or you're directing a film, you can use facades. You can, put 40 doors that don't open and you don't care because you know which door the protagonist is going through. When you're designing worlds to be explored by your audience for hopefully decades, you don't have that luxury. You have to know what's behind every door because the audience is eventually going to see every door. And so you have to build a world that can really sustain that kind of long-term exploration.
Actually, Terry Pratchett had a great quote about that. He talks about the most important thing to building off Morpork and sustaining the number of novels he's written is plumbing.
Yeah.
He had to think about when you get to the level of detail that you know how the water comes into Ankh-Morpork and the crap goes out of Ankh-Morpork, you know you've hit the right level of detail.
I mean, there's the Battletech universe now has 300 novels and, over a 30-year period, and it's you better know what the plumbing works because if you're going to have, especially, that's by probably 100 authors that have worked in that world, and you got to have a strong foundation for that to happen. All right, James, another category.
I'll take games.
Should ask everyone this one.
All right.
No, ask me.
All right, you first. What was your favorite game growing up?
Depends on what part of growing up you mean. I did play a lot of D&D. I played a lot of a homebrewed minis game, but can I just say Atari? Because that's what I spent all my time doing. Like everything on that original console.
Jeff?
Super Mario Brothers, played a ton of that. Final Fantasy, played a ton of that. But I think the one that actually had the most impact was a game that my dad's friend programmed for me that I got on this like 5 1/4 floppies with the line in the beginning. It's like for Jeff Long on his 6th birthday or whatever it was, because it taught me that people make these things.
Chris?
Well, for board gaming, it was Risk, without a doubt. I took a ping pong table with blank cardboard on it, and I built a world to the same scale of the original game that we could play for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we added ships and all sorts of things to it. That was the greatest. But then when I got into gaming, I mean, there's a different game every 5 years. So Utopia, and Populous, Duke Nukem. 3D that and then of course Battlefield 1942. I nearly destroyed my marriage with that game. The music made my hair stand up, and then now Minecraft, my new love.
Ryan?
When I was growing up, I played a fair amount of D&D, but then my gaming group decided that wasn't complicated or sophisticated enough. And we went to Rollmaster by ICE, which we knew was superior because they had way more books with way more charts. And there was one book where each page where it was dedicated to a whole chart of one weapon. You had a different one for a dagger, different page for a dirk. And we also knew it was more sophisticated because we played for 6 months trying to get a character past first level. They all kept dying because the critical hit tables were, it was like half a book.
Any crit that differentiates a spleen from other internal organs, that's a critical hit table.
But we ate it up. I'm kind of wondering what was wrong with us, but we loved it. We just consumed it and spent many hours.
That explains a lot.
Tom?
Yeah, I really have to say Magic. I started playing Magic in 1997 when I was 12, and I'm 25 now, and I've been playing ever since then. So that's like half of my life, which is crazy. And I did a lot of growing up in those 13 years, so, well, some people would tell you that I haven't, but yeah, I would say Magic.
It's a tough one. I'm going to go with the original XCOM. That was
Yes.
the first game that I win. That was the first game that... So I was playing this at the same time as a very good friend of mine, and we would exchange stories when we saw each other at school the next day, and we would take divergent paths. And it was one of the first games where there was a highly social element that was not built into it. It was just sort of an emergent social element because we were exploring differently. And we started comparing these war stories. And it was just one of those first games that gave me an inclination that games could be something more than pressing buttons and shooting aliens.
What's our next category?
Oh, I've got to go to my strengths. Who would win 200?
Yeah, that looks dumb. All right, another
Gandalf versus Yoda.
one. Dragons versus mechs.
Dragons versus mechs.
And I can throw things at you from here.
Fair enough. There was a great, and by great I mean great, movie called D-War, Dragon Wars, that explored this very topic. And I don't care unless these are magically enhanced. The sheer physics of explosive decompression or just explosive force is no match for biological material of any kind. One missile, no dragon, lots of spell components raining down the ground.
However, mechs are very susceptible to heat.
Some mechs that need to be balanced well.
I think I remember in early versions of BattleTech, you get an advantage if your mech is standing in a lake because its
Yes.
cooling systems
Indeed.
and its legs
Yes.
are much more efficient. So if there's no lake nearby, maybe the dragons have an edge.
But that's why you go fight ice dragons.
Sure.
All right, James, give us a category.
I want to play this game. I want to make this game.
Game design, is that the middle one?
Yeah.
All right, I don't know. We kind of already touched on this. Let's open this up. You go first, but then anybody else open up. If you have anything, what's your number one piece of advice of people trying to get into this field? I think we kind of touched on that, which is make stuff.
Yeah,
That's
I would
all we got.
actually add to it, make the game you want to play. You may at some point in your career wind up revising a game for some demographic that isn't you, but don't waste your time until you have to.
I have one little twist on that. If you find you're good at something, it doesn't really matter what it is. If you could be the best in the world, you can almost guarantee that someone will pay you and give you a job doing it. And that is, I think, inspiring if you like doing something really strange.
All right, Tom, pick our last one.
I will not touch that.
I'll take
But that's my skill, not touching it.
Just games.
What?
Games.
Just games.
Just games?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Got redundancy.
Yeah, all right.
These are
Clear
the
the
questions
board,
submitted
Tom.
by the audience.
I don't think anyone... I'm number 4 now, by the way.
All right.
5X combo.
This is the martini, the last one. In your opinion, what is the worst game ever created?
Wow.
Feel free.
Monopoly not close.
Monopoly is bad.
Oh, come on, man.
What do you mean, come on?
All right, we can have this fight. There'll be another hour, though.
All right, let's open it up. Come on.
I do think
Take the
Monopoly is
gloves off.
terrible. Monopoly has infinite... And this is from a very, sort of technical, purist game designer kind of standpoint. Monopoly is full of excessive, random, garbage mechanics that it doesn't need to make the points it's trying to make. If you want to make a game
The
about...
whole evening could be over with one dice roll. Is that what you're getting at?
What I'm getting at is that maybe you could cut half of the mechanics in the game. It would be more fun, and it would still get the point of you are trying to bankrupt each other across. So that to me is why I think Monopoly is so bad.
Okay,
Like,
you have a
it's
counterpoint?
Well, it's not my turn yet.
Oh.
Well, I got one. If games are only about winning, if it's about having fun with your family, the game works. I know, it's hard to comprehend. Because really, you're right, it is. Anything with randomness, we designed randomness out of everything. That's why we used physics to determine if every single shell would land in total annihilation. No randomness. People say, oh, we want weather, we want this, we want that. I'm like, randomness, no. No random in the game. That's purest strategic gamer thinking.
When did I say I didn't like randomness?
Well,
I mean, I make a trading card game. You start with like the cards in a random order, and we love that you don't know what the top card of your deck is. That's so important.
Well, it's a different kind of random.
No,
It's the fact that you can land on Park Bliss or not.
That's not what I'm saying the problem is. The problem, I guess, is like, do you really need railroads and utilities and like, you know, 2 different piles of cards in the middle? Like, can that just be 1 pile of cards in the middle?
It's not elegant. It's not
It's interesting.
What?
It's interesting.
I mean, there's interesting, like, in quotes that I kind of think of as bad, and then there's actually interesting where, like, the critical hit tables that you're talking about that are like a book thick, that's interesting. But, you know.
It gives it
Well, how come the Matrix ends the same way every time? It would be a lot more interesting if it was different every. The point is that people play Monopoly to be entertained. They don't need a strategic decision at every turn.
Okay, so
That's why it's good. It's something you watch.
But after the first 2
Monopoly
hours
just
of
happens to you.
Monopoly, you don't finish
Monopoly
the
doesn't
game,
last
and
2 hours.
So
So homebrew is even worse. But
Sure.
I would like to take a point. My job is a little bit different from, I think, what many of these guys do. And they call me a developer at Wizards. I don't actually program. It's just like different from a designer. A designer makes something, they give it to me, and it's my job to polish the thing so that it's more fun. So when I look at something like Monopoly, I don't see like, this game sucks or whatever. I see, how can I make this game better? And boy, do I see a ton of ways I could make Monopoly better. So that's one of the reasons.
so did all the companies that never published it. I mean, there's screeds about how bad it is from the time when it was invented. But then you look at its performance and its longevity, and there's got to be something good about it.
That does not mean that I have to like it.
Oh, that's true, but it is good.
I think
Especially by Brian's definition, right? You work at Sega. If it makes money, it's good.
Serving the needs of its customers.
Are guns good?
Guns make money.
Are they good?
You're gonna have to ask Brian that question.
I don't think money is the measure of good. I think it's hours of fun
Right.
is good.
And
guns
Monopoly
don't create
also
hours of
survives
fun.
that test. Guns are only fun for a couple of seconds.
As a developer at Wizards, one of the most frustrating things is to play a game and to realize there are things about this that I wish I could change. And like, I'm having enough fun, but there are things going on in here that I wish I could reach into this screen and tweak mechanics, and then I would be happier. And if I hit a critical threshold of that, like, I just can't play the game anymore and have fun. And that's something that will happen to you if you become a game designer, is like, your standards will go up, and it's sad to watch that happen sometimes, but I don't know. Monopoly is way underwater for me, and that's why I think it's...
I don't think.
I'm going to switch the context from a debate on Monopoly to get the worst game from everybody else.
All right.
All right, Nick, what's your worst game? And then we'll call points.
Well, it's a million-way tie. It is a million-way tie between all of the games that did not inspire us to go out and be better people. It's a bit of a cop-out and a bit of a last question sort of answer, but and Monopoly falls in that category. You know, nobody went out and decided to make a more efficient power grid because they bought an electrical utility in Monopoly. Games have an awesome power, and those that do not live up to it fail.
I think Donald Trump would probably disagree. He was probably inspired by Monopoly.
Donald Trump would
So
basically everything.
I think there is kind of an official answer to this question. If you Google worst game of all time, and in many game textbooks, they call out E.T. for 2600 extraterrestrial, which has a story behind it about how it had like a 6-week development cycle, and they knew that the property was so popular and so amazingly cool that it would just fly off the shelves, and then they had to bury 5 million copies of it in a landfill or something like that. That might be missing parts of the story.
Blew the bottom out of the entire first wave of the industry, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I believe that there is an online version that you can play to see just how super horrible it is. At the very least, you can YouTube it and watch somebody playing it because it's just full of just inexplicable things happening, and you don't know what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go. It's sort of a delightful lesson.
James?
There there are plenty of terrible games you've never heard of because they're terrible. So really this question is about what is the most overhyped game, and that's probably, in some people's opinion, Monopoly. I'm not a big fan of Settlers for the same reason. But I can tell you one terrible game that I have heard of that you should go find. It's a PlayStation game called Irritating Stick. And the back of the box says it's based on the hit Japanese TV show Irritating Stick. I'm not sure if it's correctly punctuated. You can have it at home. But it is just using the D-pad, not an analog stick, oh my god, to get a ball through a maze. And if you hit the edge of the maze, it's like Operation. It zaps you and you go back to the beginning. That's the whole game. I bought it because of the name. It was good for entertainment, obviously, but oh my god, it's bad.
I think it's a trick question. There's no answer because theoretically, I think you covered it. There's millions. You said it too. If you've never heard of it, it's irrelevant. If you've heard of it, it's played, which means it's not that bad.
I am personally responsible for many of the terriblest games in the world, by the way.
I used to, when I was younger, I used to hate games like tic-tac-toe, because it was like if you went first, you could always win. And then I realized later, when I have kids find these things amusing. So you have to go back and understand that games, again, aren't about whether you win or not. Games are about whether they create fun. So there's a game out there for everybody.
So, first, Brian, I thought where you were going was actually Custer's Revenge.
Oh.
So anybody that knows that game knows why that's the worst game in history.
Yeah, but it made money.
So
he's not going to.
The second is atop a mountain of steaming licensed games. There was one for Friday the 13th on the 8-bit Nintendo. When I was a kid, my friends and I played this one and had no idea what was going on. It was the worst game I had ever played because we literally could not figure out what the mechanics were, what the object was, and every time we turned around, there was just get killed, and there was this big sign that popped out that said, "You and your friends are dead." And that was it. And so this was a terrible game. And friends too. That was, and so we subverted it until we saw "You and your friends are dead. Have a nice day." Then it became hysterically funny. But
boy, I've got one like that.
At the risk of pissing off people on the panel, actually, I think the worst game in my history was the version of Magic: The Gathering that suddenly explained why my friends and I had been doing it wrong the whole time. Because all the fun that we had with Magic, and when we were in high school in '94, '95, old Arabian Nights, days, right? Was figuring out things like Library of Lang and all those cards that really were incredibly broken, but that's what made the game fun for us, was completely screwing the other guy. And so when those rules were clarified to show us that we'd been doing it wrong, it sucked the fun out of it. So, sorry.
Well, I want to thank all of our speakers.
What's yours?
My worst game?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I'm one of those people that the worst game that is usually a game that I've done is the one I end up hating the most, because it's like I look back at it and go, oh man, I messed that up, could have done that better, and so I always end up being a tough critic on all the ones I've done. Those are the ones I can feel. I can get a really good passion of hatred going for my own old games, or the ones that I feel I could have done a better job on. In terms of other people's games, I kind of like Tom look at him and go, well, I would have done something different here, but I don't know if I can build up quite the passion that I can for the stuff that I've done wrong. Anyway, I want to thank all of our speakers. Thank all of you. This is our first event of its ilk. We hope they will grow and prosper. And so let's give everybody all the speakers.
We're due, actually, because of the success of this, and a lot of you seemed interested, we've got some good feedback. We're going to try and do this again probably in September, actually, right around PAX. We want to do another event like this. And I want to thank you, too, because it was like 200 degrees in here for those of you, and it was freezing in the other room, apparently. We've got some refreshments down at the center if you want to stop by. And thank you very much for spending your Friday.